What's up, my martial arts fanatics? Welcome back to System Breakdowns. As always, I'm Coach Greg, and today we're talking about, by request, Jose Aldo. This is one of the more requested guys I've got. I've had a lot of people asking me to do this one. I've actually been wanting to do it for a while, so it works out well. I'm a huge fan of this guy. You know, obviously one of the legends of the sport, often compared with guys like Anderson Silva as one of the greatest strikers of all time. At one point, he went on like an 18-fight win streak between the WEC and the UFC, which is bananas, especially as a striker to do that. But he is a Jiu Jitsu black belt who did obviously use his phenomenal striking in the pocket with amazing ability to read his opponents and do devastating damage, particularly with knee strikes, body shots, and leg kicks, of course. His leg kicking game was just one of the top in the UFC for sure. And it was certainly a thing that people always went into a fight against him fearing with good reason. But we're going to talk about today the systems that he used, what made him so successful, how he was able to employ this kind of a game, and what made him such a remarkable fighter in the UFC. So I'm really excited to present to you today Jose Aldo. All right, let's start by talking about his defensive tactics, because he is well known for the leg kick and the body shots, these things that laid people out, just really devastating. But people forget how amazing of a technician he was defensively. Allowed him to stay safe to the point where usually the first 2 to 3 rounds of many of his fights, he took no damage and just picked guys apart because he was free to do so because they couldn't land on him. And a lot of this is because he was actively aware of leg kicking and takedowns while passively defending anything that was punching towards his head. And what allowed him to do that is by being proactive with his head movement a lot. So he was an orthodox fighter who came in here. A lot of times he'd, probe with his hand a little bit, be very twitchy with it, right? So that they never were sure when he was going to pull the trigger on his jab and stuff like that. But while he was in there, so this was kind of just an active movement thing. And then the jab also kind of helped keep him at bay. But what really did the trick was his head movement. Anytime they started to come forward, he was immediately moving his head. He was a very active head movement guy. So anytime he entered into range, the head was moving. And then all he had to do was continue the motion as they came forward with punching. What this meant is that he could actively look for the things that he had to be concerned with that are hard to read, like leg kicks, where he could just actively check it. And same thing with takedowns. But passively, he could just kind of be in here moving his head. And as things came, continue through. It's very much the same philosophy as like in Taekwondo, we do this like bounce step and a lot. And this action and motion allows you to continue. It's easier to keep moving than to start moving cold. So he would come in here and start with these head motions from the outside, very active here, right? And then what would happen is, if punches started coming down, he was already in motion, so it made it easier to continue slipping. The thing that I like that he did as well is a lot of guys, they're content to slip once and avoid the punch and then they stop. He didn't do that. He always treated anything incoming, even if it was a one-off, as if he was going to get a combination thrown at him. So when he slipped just a jab, it would often look like here, he'd slip, and then he'd come through a couple more times, just as a precaution. What this meant is, whether he slipped the jab or not, it didn't matter. If they threw anything else at him, he was already out of the way and clearing it so that it was very hard. You might catch him once on something light, but the idea of catching him with a combination, it's going to be a huge task because his head is going to continue moving. He doesn't stop after the first slip. It's a very interesting concept. It is a bit tiring, though. There's a fatigue factor. He does some things that we'll talk about in a bit that help kind of offset that. But there's a reason that as he got into 3rd, 4th, 5th rounds, he often suffered from a lot of fatigue. It's because he was often doing a lot of head and body movement. When you do this for 15 minutes, don't even fight somebody. Just move your head and body for 15 minutes like this, right? That is tiring. And he's able to do it for a long time. But it's also why guys had a hard time hitting him, because he was so active in his movement. Combined with that, he would add in some fantastic blocking. So he'd be in here moving, and if things started coming, he could add in a secondary thing and then move his feet, frame out, and stuff like that. In addition to that, when he started sensing guys were going to really commit, because he would frustrate them from the outside, where they couldn't catch him with little things because he was so active, right? When you're that active, and guys don't feel like they could hit you with the one-offs, then they start getting committed. And when he did this, he used a couple different strategies. Of course, one of the big ones, the knee strike. When he get guys committed, he loved to clock them with the knee. But his footwork was also fantastic. He would also do a lot of rolling out to the right often framing or throwing it with a jab, very similar to what you see out of like a Dominic Cruz, where he would roll out, he'd be in here, throw a jab, and then reset. But what I think was my favorite technique of his is he would slip left and he would add a step, pivot, and then counter. This is like some classic boxing footwork, and it's something that's transitioned very well to his later career as well. He'd be in here, throwing this here, slip, slip, and then when they commit, that step out is fantastic. Deep step, pivot, and cross. That combination is so effective for him. And so this kind of footwork, proactive head movement, framing, rolling out, step, pivot, and cross, this type of stuff made him a freaking nightmare to punch at. And keep in mind, he's doing this passively. He's just responding to what's given to them because he doesn't have to look for it, right? He's just moving, and then as he sees the punch coming, he changes his emphasis, right? So it would be like, I'm emphasizing looking for the leg kick and the takedown, and I'm passively looking for the head because I'm already dealing with this. And then if the punch starts coming, I can late respond to this, probably evade this very easily, and divert my attention to this and not get hit, right? That's kind of how it worked. Late passive responding with proactive gestures to defend the punching, and then proactive awareness on leg kicking and takedowns. So if you did try to shoot, he was able to frame out and back up very easily, right? Right? It was very easy to defend because he was looking for any level change whatsoever. And then when it comes to leg kicking, most of the guys who tried to leg kick him got nothing, especially as he got like later and later in his career. Man, you try to leg kick, pop, pop, right? Proactively, pop, just checking all day long. Just so hard to catch that guy with leg kicks. The guys who did have success with leg kicking him, it was usually later on in the fight when he's a little bit tired, because as he tired out, his defenses kind of started to slow down a little bit, or they would do a lot to set it up first. Like Frankie Edgar would do like a lot of step, fake the jab, and then throw the leg kick. That's how he started landing in the third round against him. Once again, late rounds, he tended to get a little bit tired. Now, some of the things that he did to offset this, early in his career, I think what worked the best was when he just leg kicked the shit out of people. When I'm getting tired, I can afford to get a little bit more tired if they can't walk. One of the things I felt like as his career went on that he got away from that I would have liked to have seen him stick with more is just attacking the leg kick over and over and over again. I really felt like he was a guy that he had such a nasty leg kick that came out of nowhere. I would have liked to have seen him continue to pursue that in all of his fights, not just one or two. Most of his fights, he'd land a couple to have an impact. But I felt like the fights he was the most successful is when he did not let up on that leg kick, where he just was constantly on top of it. Pop! And when he threw the leg kick, since we're on the topic, let's talk about a little bit of his offensive, his basic things that he liked to do on offense. Obviously, his three primary attacks. The jab, the leg kick, and then the body shot. These are probably his biggest offensive attacks. The knee was more of a counter thing. We'll talk about that in a minute. But when he attacked offensively, he would throw a lot of punching and distract them from the leg kick. When he threw the leg kick, he made them forget about it. He would either sit here and make them think about how they're going to catch this guy who's just standing in the pocket and is very hard to hit, and then all of a sudden, pop! No step, no pivot, just right to it. And this guy kicked like a mule because he had a soccer background too, and capoeira. So this guy could kick. I've seen some guys in like Muay Thai talk about how you should step to throw the leg kick. And sometimes that's useful. And they recommend that over like pivoting. I personally think that anything you could do to not telegraph, particularly when it comes to leg kicks, is ideal. Because leg kicks, you want to try to hide them. And he was really great at using the principle of projected intention, which means that all my energy is diverted upwards, right? Getting them thinking about up. Pop! And then he throws it low. When he's throwing, look how everything is looking upward as I'm here, right? I'm even in mid-kick selling a high attack, and that type of stuff is what makes it so successful. And then, of course, he would punctuate with leg kicks a lot of times, too, where he would throw a jab to a leg kick. He would throw a dutchie, throw a hook to a leg kick. And that type of stuff was a nice way of punctuating, where he would build off of the jab a lot anyway, so he would be in here jab, right? Jab, jab, leg kick. And this is going to set up his combinations that we're going to talk about in a second too. So the leg kick, of course, became a fantastic weapon because he made you forget about it, and then he used the principle of projected attention to divert your energy upwards so that you couldn't see it coming. His leg kicks literally came from nowhere. It's why they were so hard to stop, and his success rate on them is so high. I think a lot of times when guys leg kick, they tend to over-telegraph it, they're looking at it, stuff like that. You know, when I throw a leg kick, pop, right? I don't want them to see it coming. I want this to be a small motion. I don't want to skip into this so they can see it. I want to be pop. So, as a result, his leg kick became fantastic. Like I said, a lot of stuff built off of the jab, particularly in his later career. One of the things he used to offset, we talked about that fatigue, you know, early on in his career, it was the leg kick. He could get a little bit tired because he would just chop away at him. And it made it hard for them to be offensive because by the time they got to the third round, they could barely stand. Later on in his fight, he reeled it back and he became putting more use into the jab. It's a lighter attack that he could just snap out, pop, right? Pop, pop. But even throughout all his career, he built off of that jab a lot. And so he would use the jab to set up some combinations. Set up the jab cross, of course. But then he would use that. And one of my combinations that I liked that he used to throw was the body shot to a cross. And man, that body shot was so brutal. Like, every time he landed, he was so good at hitting the liver because he would get their hands up. Once again, principle projected intention, right? Get them thinking about the leg, get them thinking high, pop, pop. And then he would catch him with that uppercut right to the body and hit that liver because they were so busy thinking high, they had no defense for it. And if they did, he would start to set them up by going for like the cross to an uppercut, right? And start getting their hands even high, pop, pop, coming back home to that body uppercut a lot. I really liked it when he did the body uppercut to a leg kick too, where you come in here, jab, right, threaten him, pop, pop. Man, that combination for him was so nasty. Step in deep, really rip the body and punctuate it nicely. Man, his success rate when he hit the body, like every time that guy went to the body, guys did this. Ugh! Like he almost finished a lot of fights just by hitting those body shots. And sometimes these guys just powered through it. But man, it's such an impact. We talk about fatigue, balancing the scales, body shots, a very effective way to do that. So he's got the leg kick, simmering down, using the jab a lot, and then hitting these body shots and ripping them, knocking the wind out of men. If you get disrupted like that with those body shots, it's such an impact on your overall game. He was very good about doing that. So, like I said, he would do a lot of combinations like that to put this stuff together. Okay, so let's talk about counters a little bit. What I found interesting is that, like I said, Jose Aldo, because he stayed in the pocket, it was easier for him to draw out these counters because his defensive read was so high that it forced guys into actions that they weren't comfortable with. Most fighters are not comfortable staying in punching range the whole time. Jose Aldo is. Now, if you did happen to, come at him, sometimes he would back up and then reset back into that pocket. So if you did back him up and he was in here, he wasn't afraid to back up. And a lot of times he would throw this jab as he backed up and let you eat a jab on the retreat. It's part of his countering strategy. But a lot of times, he would stand here, like I said, he'd roll out, reset, right? Step, doing this kind of stuff. But one of the things that was really great was his ability to use intercepting strikes. So an intercepting strike is a proactive technique where, obviously he was great at things like catch parries. We'll talk about that in a second. But he was also really great at, as he was in here, using the slip, and as they came in here, forcing them to miss and catching them. This is actually another thing that he did really well for fatigue, to balance the scales by making them miss a lot. Obviously, it's easy to talk about the leg kicks and the body shots and using a light jab to wear them down a little bit. But when you can force a guy to miss a lot, that is phenomenally tiring, particularly if you get him to overcommit. And this is what he would do. He'd stand outside and then force him to miss, drop his head, and throw a straight right down the center. And as that punch goes whizzing by his head, he catches him, and those counters hit harder. So that's a thing that he was fantastic at. He also was really great, like I said, at catch parries, where he would parry and jab here, right? He'd be in here, where it's again proactive head movement as a punch came, pop, pop, right? right back at him, slipping if he couldn't. But, you know, obviously he'd try to throw something back whenever he felt like the moment was right. But he never forced it. He was really good at picking his moments, the right time to throw back at him. And also he was really good at doing a lot of return fire so that they would throw, hit his guard or something like that, or miss, and then immediately he'd come right back at him. So he never felt like they could easily throw at him without eating something back. And that's a big threat as well to keep in mind. You know, if I'm going to play a defensive game, I got to make them feel uncomfortable. It's kind of the same kind of principle as they talk about in Jiu Jitsu, the idea of having a pressure guard, being in a bottom position and giving your opponent a sense of pressure and that constant threat. And he does that in his defensive countering, where he slips back, right? And every time they come in, right, he make them feel the threat, right? They never felt safe coming at him because at any point, one of these punches would be coming back at him. Or worse, the big knee strike. And really, the knee strike was when for guys didn't want to sit at the range he wanted. When guys started to want to pressure forward a lot, this is why he used the knee. Whether they were trying to shoot or whether they were trying to come forward and blitz or clinch or whatever, and they were trying to really increase this by charging at him, this is when, bam, he'd go straight for that knee strike. And he would throw it multiple times in a row to send a message like, look, we're going to stay out here and we're going to play the game I want to play. If you try to pressure in on me, I'm going to make you regret it, and I'm going to give you a knee strike to remind you why that's not okay. And it was dangerous, man. Like, he laid dudes out with this. I think it was Cub Swanson that right off the buzzer, right? Bam! Just laid him out with a knee strike at the beginning of the fight. But guys would charge at him, and they would eat this. It made them afraid of takedowns because they were afraid of the knee, and make them afraid to charge him because of the knee. And once again, he'd sit out here and force him to play in the pocket to play his kind of a game that he was better at, right? Where he was proactive, he would catch him, pop. And then, if they tried to get overcommitted, bam! That's when he'd give him the knee. Very, very effective. Now, he himself was not really a takedown guy. In fact, the only times I'd ever see him throw takedowns is if he got clipped hard and he was desperate. And it was usually too late by then. I actually would have liked to have seen him do more of a takedown throw. We'll talk about that in, like, opportunities. But I felt like, as it was, he didn't really need to. He liked the type of game he played. He liked to draw people into his world and beat them at it. Now, when it came to takedown defense, that's a different story. He had phenomenal takedown defense. Usually the way that most guys took him down was off of the leg kick if they tried to catch it because he had been throwing it too often. That's why I think he actually reeled back on how much he used it, because after some of his earlier fights, like the Uriah Faber fight, Uriah started trying to take him down off. Now, it didn't do him any good because as soon as he got taken down, he'd go to a butterfly guard, pop back up. But generally speaking, I think that was what made him kind of start to shift, was the threat of takedowns. But I felt like he should have stuck with it. I think that he's good enough at getting up in those situations, it didn't matter. Now, if somebody did try to take him down, once again, we talked about passively looking at offense while using proactive head movements, right, that he could just respond as a late response. But then proactively looking for takedowns and looking for leg kicks. We try to leg kick and pop, right? Pop. Then they try to take down, and it was frame out and then get clear. If he did happen to get a leg, he'd overhook and shuck and then limp leg out, or frame, limp leg out. A lot of framing and backing up escapes, right? So as he's in here, if you did try to, right, it made it hard because people were afraid to just charge at him anyway because you never knew if that knee was coming too. The threat is often your best prevention when we talk about takedown defense. I talked about that in my takedown defense prevention video. The threat of incoming damage is often your best weapon. If, you know, this is why guys didn't freely take down Francis Ngannou, because they knew, bam, that uppercut could be a real threat. Uppercuts and knees, if you can threaten them every time they come in aggressively, it's going to slow guys down a little bit and force them into the range that you want. And if they do try to shoot, it tends to be a little bit sloppier after they've gotten caught a few times. And then it's easy to frame out because of the way that he's proactively very aware of level changes. As soon as that head comes down, he knows, frame, back away, and ready to limp leg out. If you did happen to catch him down, he was very quick to pop back up. So you start seeing him go for butterfly guards, kicking off, getting back to his feet. Now, from a jiu-jitsu standpoint, let's talk about this a little bit. So I was going to talk about this more in opportunities, but I'll talk about this now. His bottom game was good, but he had some real problems when he got clipped and tried to use a bottom game, because what he would do a lot of times, and this drove me nuts about Jose Aldo, he would fall down, high, wide feet, and framing, trying to keep them at bay. And what inevitably happened is he would get clipped, clip, and then he would just hide out here and turtle, and then eventually lose. When you get clipped, it's really important to draw people in and to pull people down. And I would have liked to have seen him do more to come up and bring them down and tie them up. When he played a bottom game that was based on a response to a takedown or stuff like that, he was very quick to butterfly guard, get back to his feet and stuff like that. He was great at that stuff. But one of the problems that he'd have, and you see this like the Max Holloway fights and stuff like that, where he gets clipped and then he might go for a bad takedown or whatever, and he ends up on his back, and he would just, I don't know if he was trying to do like an open guard to like up kick or what, but what ended up happening is he just kind of stayed there with his feet up and framed. Now, granted, I'm going to give him a little bit of a pass on this, because when you get clipped and you're 4 rounds into a fight, you're not thinking it's your best, right? So there could have been some of that involved. But I'd seen them, this is kind of his natural default, and they say revert to your lowest level of training. And I think that this is a thing I would have liked to have seen him improve. So this is one of, and I hate to nitpick on this guy because he was so amazing, but this is one of those areas of opportunity I felt like he could have probably come back on a couple of fights and maybe even won them, because like the Max Holloway fights in particular were very close. And I can make an argument that the first couple rounds he was even winning those fights. And I felt like when he got clipped, if he had been able to pull them in and suck them into a guard, or even just like switch to like De La Riva X guard, like what you see out of like Charles Oliveira, or just pull them in, coming up, going for a single leg like a Glover Teixeira, something. I felt like if he had done something else, there's a good chance he might have come back and won those fights. Now, once again, I hate nitpicking at this guy because he's so amazing, but that was the thing I noticed. Now, that being said, let's move on to his offensive jiu-jitsu. Generally speaking, man, if he got on top of you, you were having a bad day. He's definitely a guy that his top game was fantastic. You know, he would get to this, often what you'd see is him get to a half guard and start throwing punches, right, coming in here. And then what you'd start to see is crossface, flatten out the shoulders, using his back foot here to pry open the feet, getting his feet across, and then it was right to a crucifix, pop, pop, pop. Really nasty damage, force them to turn away, and then it's getting on a back and just getting a body triangle, throwing bombs, stuff like that, being very devastating from there. So that was the majority. You didn't see a lot of jiu-jitsu out in MMA, but the few times you saw it, you did tend to see this kind of a pattern where, particularly from the half guard, throwing bombs, flatten them out with the crossface, use the feet to pry it open, getting to a side control, and then attacking from there. But I would have liked to have seen more of his jiu-jitsu game over the years. I felt like he had a really good one. It's another area where, when I talk about opportunities for improvement, so we do this in the last segment on this, and sometimes I kind of hate doing it, especially on a guy like this who was so great. But I did feel like there was a couple opportunities he could have done a little bit better. One of those areas was, I think, when he got clipped, that kind of open guard that he did, not sucking guys into his guard. Another area would have been, I would have liked to have seen more takedowns out of him. I think a level change game, even if he didn't do it a lot, enough that it made them have a moment of pause, could have been a real issue, especially because since he stayed in the pocket a lot, as he backed guys up to a cage, this could have been a real problem for guys right here. If he's in here threatening the leg kick, right, coming in here, threatening the body shot cross, and then coming in, putting him up against the cage, maybe taking it back. But that level change shot, it would have given guys just one more thing to worry about out there. Downside of that is, had he done it too much, it would have only made his fatigue worse. That goes into our next area of opportunity, was the fatigue. I think he did everything he could to make the system that he used work. I don't think it was a lack of conditioning. I think he was plenty conditioned. I think it's just a hard system to constantly be doing this all day. And he's a pocket fighter. This is where he thrives. So he has to play to his strength. So it's not like he could have just changed his game. This is what he needs to do to be successful. And I think he did a good job mitigating that. Like I said, attacking the body, you know, forcing guys to miss a lot, you know, actively throwing that leg jab as he went on later in his career so it wasn't as tiring, and then the leg kick to chop away their legs. It kind of balanced the scales a little bit. And that's why most of his fights, he did come out on top. I think later on in his career, guys got kind of wise and they started burning him out a little bit. But the fatigue was a real issue. You know, I'm not sure how much else he could have done with that because that is his style. I think that the only thing I would have recommended is maybe just try to finish them off. And I think as his career went on, he did try to change that. And one of the things you see that I didn't talk about on this yet was his blitzing. Later on in his early career, you don't see this as much. He's content to just win by, like, you know, if he gets a knockout, that's great, but he's content to take his time and pick a guy apart, right? But later on, he starts chasing the finish a little bit more. And I think that's because it also does kind of help offset that fatigue. If you're chasing the finish and you try to finish guys off, you're more likely to end the fight in the earlier rounds, which is what he needed. And so what you started seeing is when he started clipping guys, coming in here with a cross to a big hook, and he would chase guys down to try to punctuate that and really get in, pop, pop, and really try to finish the fight. And I think that's a good mentality for a guy like that who he is concerned about going past the third round to try to finish it in that first 3 rounds by chasing them with that blitz. Where I'm in here, right? And then if I do catch him, come here, pop, pop, chasing with the big cross, stepping, and then throwing a big hook as they try to run away, let him run into it. He had a lot of success with that. He landed a lot of those. Then put guys up against the wall, pop, 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 tee off on him a little bit. I think that I would have liked to see him do a little bit more stuff to pin them in that position. Once they're in here, throwing a leg kick on this side, pulling them back in so that they can't run away. He let guys kind of escape that sometimes. But overall, I think, you know, that punctuation was really nice as a blitz. Last thing I'm going to talk about for opportunities, and I feel like I got a lot of them, even though these are, I hope it doesn't sound like it's more than nitpicking. This really is nitpicking because the guy was so amazing. I hate to, like, frame this, but there was certainly a mental game side of this that I think that he could get past most guys. But there were a couple guys at the highest level. Conor McGregor, I think, got in his head. It forced him to early on chase a big punch, and that's what Conor clipped him with, right? As he came in with this big punch, he landed on Conor even after he got clipped and it did damage. But I think that he never would normally have done it. That's not how he fights. He's a technician who comes out there and walks guys down, right? Forcing them in the pocket. And I think had he done that against Conor McGregor, we'd have had a very different fight, but Conor got in his head. And there's something to be said for when he fights guys that I think he considers too dangerous for him. Max Holloway, Volkanovski, guys like that. I think it gets in his head a little bit. And I think he can get to this point, but there's just a couple guys that I think that, for whatever reason, it seemed like it wasn't a technical thing to me. I think he was more technical than probably anybody he's ever fought. But I do think that there's a mental side to this, and I'm not sure what caused that or what you can do about that. It's just my observation. But I think overall, what an amazing fighter. So much we can learn from this guy and the way that he fights and how to pick guys apart. Like I said, I think if you take this system, if you're going to take anything from this, I would say it's the read and the ability to using proactive head movements and not just stopping on the first slip, but continuing through. If they punch, doing 3 to 4 head motions. Anytime they throw anything, even if you're sure it's just a one-off, always adding a couple of things in there to give yourself a little bit of extra breathing room just in case they do throw a combination. Being proactive with the head movements so that you can focus on reading the other threats. I think that's a great system to take away from them. But then, like I said, no telegraph combination or leg kicking with the not telegraphing the leg kick with the projected intention principle at play. Throwing those quick body shots to mix things up and really hit that liver, do damage. This type of stuff is really a fantastic system that I think he was able to employ over a long period of time and continuously do this and successfully win. So it's a great system to break down. But I hope you enjoyed this, guys, and thanks for watching.